Well, good evening, Tom. It's a pleasure to be interviewing you again.
Oh, good evening, Donna. It's my pleasure to be talking with you again. Your interviews are always some of the very best. So
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
looking forward to it.
That's all your material, not my doing. There is one video out there on your channel that is entitled "What Happens After We Die." This was done as an excerpt from a Path 11 production. And I was wondering, there were a lot of comments on this. This got a lot of attention, and I think a lot of the reason it got attention is people are curious as to how you can know what happens after we die. If you could expand a little bit on that, I think that's going to clarify some of the questions that I have noted and some of the comments I've seen.
Okay, well, there's two ways to approach that, and I understand why people would have that reaction, because I don't say, well, this is the way I think it is, or this is probably the way it is, or this is the way it ought to be, but I say, very, very strongly, this is the way it is. And people say, well, how does he know that, Nobody comes back and tells us about that, but that's not the case. You see, it's another reality frame where this takes place. The transition takes place in its own reality frame. And these reality frames are accessible by you in the form of you being a conscious being. So it's not that this is unavailable. It is unavailable to someone who is locked into just this physical matter reality, this universe. So if this is your only reality frame that you have any awareness in, then, it's impossible for you to get that information firsthand, because you can't get out of this reality frame. But if you can move between reality frames, then, and you do that in a way that is, kind of repeatable and steady, and you know what you're doing. It's not one of these kind of random things that happens to you sometimes at night, and sometimes it doesn't, and you don't really have any control over what you see or where you go. But if it's something that you have complete control over, and you can get around in the reality frames, which is, getting around in reality frames, that's like, out of body, lucid dreaming, remote viewing. These are all, cousins of each other's. Primarily, the difference between those three is just the way you approach it and the beliefs that people have about them. That's the main difference. They're really mostly the same thing on a fundamental. If you get down to the basics, what's really happening there in your remote view, in your lucid dreaming, in your out of body, it's all basically the same fundamentals. But because we come with different beliefs about each one of those, and our process is different in each one of those. The out of body, you never break consciousness. You conscious all the way through from this reality frame to the other. Lucid dream, you break consciousness, then reawaken, in another reality. And in the remote viewing, usually somebody hands you a target that is double or triple blind and tells you, what do you find at this target? But then the remote viewers have found out that the targets don't have to be someplace on planet Earth. They can be in the future. They can be in the past. They can be, they realize that they can expand on that. And there's really no difference, fundamental difference in any of those theories, other than, like I say, it's the way you approach it. It's the initial, how you get there. It's like the rituals we use to do it are different. And the limitations we put on it with our beliefs. People approach all three of those with different belief systems. And you're trapped by those belief systems. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, but you can get first-hand information. It's not true that you can't. You only can't if you're trapped in this reality. Then you can't. Or only this reality and what we call the dream reality. Neither one of those will give you information about this other reality frame. And there's dozens of reality frames that one can visit. So with some discipline and practice and learning how your consciousness works, how reality works, doing a little science, a little investigation, exploring, going over it again and again, trying to, come up with evidence, learning to do things that then you have evidence for. I mean, it's all part of a long path. You can't just, take a drug and say, oh, I'm in an alternate reality frame, because you're basically loose, you're untethered, you don't have enough control to systematically explore an area and understand it that way. You just kind of get blasted into it, and then you come back without really learning a whole lot about getting there, or what it's like, or having your experiences be particularly consistent. So you have to approach it just like any scientist would approach anything. You have to go, and then you have to explore, and you come back and you go again. And is it the same place, or is it different? If it's different, how and why? And if you were exploring other lands, you'd have to do the same thing. People who were explorers didn't just head east. They'd go out a little ways, and then they'd come back to camp, right? And they'd make maps, and then they'd go a little further, and civilization spread that way, a little bit at a time. And you have to do the same thing. If you just keep going on from one unfamiliar thing to the next unfamiliar thing, you lose your bearings, you lose the context and the connection with it. So one, you can go there, but I'm kind of skirting the question. There are two answers to that. One is the objective answer, okay? And the objective answer is this: because this big toe theory, let's call it, because this big toe theory is able to do good science, it's able to explain a lot of the anomalies. We have these anomalies in science. Psi is one, telepathy is one, or any kind of psi experience is one. We've had all sorts of researchers validate that the mind affects matter. We've had paralabs validate that mind can affect, the outcome of experiment. We have the placebo effect that validates that what people hear and think and believe makes a big difference about what happens in this reality. We know that from education. We know that with children. We tell children that they're failed or stupid or something, and they do worse on tests than another random group of children that are told they're very bright. And they all started out as the same, but yet they're different because of what their teachers believe, what their parents believe, what they believe, that the mind does affect things. We know that there's power of positive thinking. There's just lots of things like that we know about. We have lots of experiments various scientists have done. We started probably, back in the 1800s, this was a real big thing. A lot of well-known scientists were doing research into the paranormal at that time, and were taken very seriously. It wasn't until probably in the middle 1900s, 1930s and 40s, that became unfashionable in science. And that's when we decided that we had no free will, that reality was deterministic. Science liked determinism, because that means everything follows equations. Everything can be determined. If you have all the initial conditions and all the rules of science, then you can predict everything that can happen. You see, that's a deterministic idea. And science liked that because it made science important. It made science had all the answers, because if it's all deterministic, then science will have all the answers. You don't need anything else. So science liked it because it put them in a position of power with all the answers. It kind of defined away all the competition as being irrelevant. So no doubt science liked that idea. So we have all these odd things been going on forever. The Rhine Institute, Duke University, did a lot of psi research. And it's perfectly clear that there were people there who could do things that were not normally able to be done. Things that they could modify with their mind, information that they could know. And Rhine did this for decades and decades, just like Paralabs has done this for decades with immaculate protocols. So it's not a matter of, well, we're not sure these guys really got that, or we don't believe that data. That's just skepticism without any intelligence connected to it. If you want to be an intelligent skeptic, then you have to go read the research. You have to see what was done. You have to understand it. Just saying, well, it doesn't make sense to me, therefore it must not be right. That is, the logic behind that is, well, I know everything, and since I don't know that, then it must not, exist. That's the kind of the nonsensical skepticism, I guess. Skepticism's good, of course. That's part of my theory. You need to be open-minded, and you need to be skeptical. But you don't need to be, ignorant and skeptical. You need to be open-minded and skeptical. Everybody should be skeptical, but that means go do your own research. It's not that hard. You can, read the books that Dean Radin's been writing. He does a lot of hard science research, good protocols, and he can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's not like, well, we think maybe something strange is going on here. It's something strange is going on here, and the probability that it's strange and not just, luck or chance is, it's only 1 in a million that it might be chance, or 1 in 10 million, or something like that. So there's lots of research. So that's not the point. But the point is that my big toe theory explains all of the present physics that we have. In other words, it's not incompatible with all the Newtonian physics, and it explains relativity in a way that contemporary physics cannot do. They cannot tell you why c should be a constant, c being the speed of light. They just assume it and go on. They don't understand why it should be like that when everything else is not that way. Everything else, if you have a moving platform and then you eject something else with a velocity from that platform, the velocities add. With the speed of light, they don't. It doesn't matter how fast your platform's going. When you turn your flashlight on, the light progresses at the speed c, period. You see, and nothing else works that way. So why do we have this one thing that seems to be an exception? Well, when you look at my theory, then there's a very obvious, and straightforward logical explanation for that. It falls right out of the nature of a virtual reality. C is as fast as you can move from one pixel of volume, information, something physical. This is a physical reality. It's a virtual physical reality. So if something physical moves from one pixel to the next, then that takes 1 delta t of the loop in the simulation. Okay, that's how you move things in a simulation. You go through the time loop, you increment t by 1 delta t. Now the next frame, if you will, the thing was here, now it's 1 pixel over. Well, that's as fast as you can move it, 1 pixel per delta t. So it explains why c is a constant. It's the time loop that is creating the simulation. And with quantum mechanics, we know that contemporary scientists will tell you that particles are really probability distributions. They're not really hard massive particles at all. The assumption that allows quantum mechanics to produce correct answers, and by correct answers I mean answers that experiment verifies, is the assumption that these particles are probability distributions, not particles. They don't treat them as hard little chunks of mass flying around. They treat them as probability distributions, you see. Now, again, nobody knows why treating particles as probability distributions should produce right answers. But it does. So it's an assumption, and we go on, you see, but it's one of those, gosh, nobody will ever understand that. It doesn't make any sense. Well, it only doesn't make any sense from a view of an objective causality. That we don't live in an objective causality. We live in a statistical virtual reality. It's a simulation, if you will. And it's not a deterministic simulation. It's a statistical simulation. And once you understand these things, then suddenly the mystery goes out of quantum mechanics. It's not mysterious at all. It's perfectly clear. It's logical. It makes sense. Of course particles are probability distributions. What else could they be? Of course c is constant. That makes good sense. Okay? So in any case, it explains science. The Pear Labs, raising and lowering the pH in a glass, is that Bill Tiller, I believe Dr. Tiller. It explains his experiments. How do they work? It explains all the so-called reverse causality experiments where they can take data that's old and then with intent modify that data to some extent. Just little tiny bits, just like in Pear Labs, but It doesn't take but a little tiny bit to violate a rule, you see. It's that they can do this and, let's say, change the bias of a set of data to the positive side, positive and negative. Say it has a mean value of this, but it could be a little more, it could be a little less. Statistics will tell you depending on how many samples you took and the nature of the problem. Well, you can make those plus or minuses come out 10 times in a row, always plus, you see. So none of them are so drastically changed that they violate any rule, but you can change them so consistently that you get the same kind of probability as, say, flipping a coin 10 times or 20 times and getting a hit every time. So it's 1 in a million kind of probability that was just luck. That you just happened to get a run of 10 of them that where the distribution was always just a little bigger than it should have been. So these are experiments that have been done by scientists for decades and decades, and we know it's real. We know the placebo effect is real. And the My Big Toe theory explains all of that science. Matter of fact, I've not yet come across anything in modern science that this theory does not have a logical explanation for. There was something I came across not long ago. It's called the Zeno effect. At first it was called the Zeno paradox. That's the word I was looking for earlier, something that people says it just doesn't make sense. They call it a paradox. Well, it resolves all these paradoxes logically. No assumptions, no big assumptions. I think it just does a lot. So it does better science. Now, what does that have to do with how do you know that when you die, what happens? Well, because in this theory we have a logical derivation of what works. Well, we get to the logic tells us that we have a virtual reality, that you are consciousness. Consciousness is not physical, and so on. We have all of these things, and downstream, later on of all of this, we have physics. We have C is a constant, particles are probability distributions, why Bill Tillers can raise and lower pH, and so on. Why Dr. Emoto can modify how ice crystals freeze with intent. So we have all of these things, but they come further downstream. So it's a logical, kind of part of the logical necessity of this whole theory says that reality is virtual and that consciousness is non-physical. It's not made in the brain. It's a virtual brain and a virtual body, and so on. And that there must be multiple lifetimes because there's a mission, why we're here and what we do, and that's to grow up, to increase the quality of our consciousness. Basically, it's an evolutionary thing, to evolve the quality of our consciousness. That's our point. Why? Because we are a larger consciousness system. That is the reality. That's the only thing that's real. So if all of this is up in the front part of the logic, and that then we look at the consequences and we solve all these physics problems with the consequences, that implies that the logic that led to those solutions in physics was good. Okay, so that then is an objective approach to how is it that you know that's the case. Well, the logic that produces better physics also requires consciousness to be non-physical, this to be a virtual reality. Consciousness being non-physical isn't connected to physical death. Physical death has nothing to do with it any more than the death of your character in The Sims has anything to do with anything, you see. So right away, this afterlife, you see, is part of the understanding from which you get better physics. And it's the upstream part. It's the part you get to before. Because of this, then that. Because of that, then the next thing in this logical stream. It's downstream that you get better physics. So because once you get to something that's measurable, okay, once you get out of the kind of the theoretical realm, which the non-physical and so on is, people would call that in the theoretical realm because it's not something you touch or smell or grab directly, down into down into the area, the logic kind of has its, this statement, leads to the next, Eventually you get down to the point where there are things that you can measure. There are things that you can do and touch and feel. But that's what I'm talking about, being downstream, logically, from these bigger, results. Well, the downstream stuff proves out by experiment, you see. Particles are probability distributions, just like this theory would say. It does explain things like what Paralabs has been doing for decades and decades. There is an explanation. It does explain all these things. And if that's true, by the time you've taken this logic and done its repercussions and what it means down to the level of measurement, and the measurements are right, well, that tells you that it must be based on something that was correct. Because you can't take faulty logic and faulty ideas that aren't right and then derive physics that works, you see. So the objective way that you know, or that I know, that this is right is because it works. That's the same as any theory. How do you know any theory is worth a damn? You only know it if its logical consequences are measured eventually in the field, right? But we don't, that measurement is often several levels of logical consequences down. We have a theory like, that the nucleus is at the center of an atom and not spread out all through an atom, but it's located at the center and it has a positive charge. Well, that was theory. Well, what we measure isn't actually that. We measure, we measure the results of experiments for which that is a kind of a logical deduction, if you will. All of these things are kind of, the logic has to run downhill from the more general to the more specific. Eventually we get it specific enough that we can do an experiment to see if that specific thing happens. Okay, so that's the way it works. Well, this theory does the same thing. So the objective, how do you objectively know that what you're talking about afterlife, well, that's part of the fundamental theory here. We are consciousness. We are not physical beings. This is a virtual reality for us to experience in, and so on. And of course, that gets derived from the basic two fundamental assumptions, which is that consciousness exists. Consciousness is, we start there, that's an assumption, and that evolution is a process by which complex systems modify themselves in order to meet environmental demands. So if you have those two basic ideas, then all the rest is logically derived. And down at the end of this derivation of logical process, you have physics, you see. You have experiments that work, that verify that this is the way it is. Because not only does it support all the physics we know, but it answers all those things that happen in our experiments that we cannot explain. This explains them, you see. So that would tend to indicate, now it's not a certainty, I guess. You can have correct results flow from poor assumptions, but that's called luck. That's called just good luck. You make compensating errors or something and you just happen to get the right answer. That can happen on some very simple problems. If you've got a 2 or 3 step problem, yes, you can start out with with something that's a wrong idea and end up with the right answer just by dumb luck. But here we're talking about a series of logical steps, starting from those 2 fundamental assumptions of consciousness and evolution, and a whole lot of if this, then that's later down this chain, we end up with experimentally derived results that support it. Okay, this is not a 3-step process. This is a 100-step process. Well, you can't go through that much complex logic and get to an answer that's right when you started with something that was bogus. See, so that's the good physics it does is an objective, I hate the word to use proof, but it's an objective indicator that the general theory is correct. And that's how science judges any theory. You look at any theory that's been done, and what makes it a good theory? The logical stream ends up with results that can be verified experimentally. That's what makes it good theory. So this is no different. So the thing is, this idea of an afterlife, this idea that you are consciousness, you're not a physical body. Your physical body doesn't die. There is no such thing as death. That's just an illusion. You're consciousness. You don't die. That's what the physical body, the physical body does, but the physical body is just a virtual simulation. Yes, there's death in The Sims. There's death in World of Warcraft. But there isn't any death, you see, in consciousness. You take your World of Warcraft character and you go back and, back to the graveyard and then run back to your whatever, and he's back in the fight again, right? So there is no real death of your character there. It's just data. It's just information. It appears to be like a death, and ours is the same way. So that's the logical answer. How do I know that's true? Because it works. Because it's early on in the logical flow of a theory that produces correct answers. That's the objective reason. Now there's the subjective reason. The subjective reason is that I've watched it. I've watched the process. I have over years, over decades, learned how to focus my intent and my awareness in various reality frames. I have been with people while they were dying, at the moment they died, went with them after they died, been through that process many, many times. I've worked on that, in that reality frame where the transitions are done. I've seen the process. I've been a part of the process. So from firsthand experience, now this is subjective experience entirely. So I don't expect anybody to believe any of that, because my subjective experience is just mine. Okay, it's just my experience. So from my subjective experiences, because I've been there, I've seen that, I've done that, I've witnessed it over and over again, and it makes sense. It's logical that it's that way. There's nothing about it that is irrational once you understand how reality works. It's perfectly reasonable, you see. So it's not only perfectly reasonable, but it's logically necessary. The theory doesn't work any other way. If you try to do something that's an objective reality and that physical reality is the fundamental reality, you can't answer any of those questions. You take the logic trail further down and you end up with a big mystery. Who knows why C is a constant? It's impossible to tell why, the double slit experiment acts the way it does and that the particles are probability distributions. You can't get the right answer because you started from a wrong assumption. You can't start, objective causality, we've tried that. That's what typical, physicists do. It doesn't work. Why is the universe expanding? What's it expanding into? What do you mean? If it's the whole universe, then how can it expand into something that's outside of our universe if there is nothing outside of our universe, because our universe is the only reality there is? You see, how does that work? And how does it keep expanding like that? What's being made? Are we making new space? More of it? How do we make it? Is there a big space machine out there that makes new space? We have all these kinds of things, right, that we don't understand in physics. And the answer to them is just so trivial once you understand how the larger reality works. So, it's a better theory if it produces more coherent, measurable results. Okay, so that's the idea. And a whole lot of other things are explained too. The paranormal things are explained. These things that J.B. Ryan in his workshop did, decades ago. Well, now there's an explanation for them, for paralabs. Now there's an explanation. How do those people do what they do at paralabs? Why do they consistently, get these answers? How does that reverse causality experiments? They've done it 100 times, 100 different ways in all sorts of, scientific houses, and it always works the same way, and nobody knows why or how, and they scratch their head and say, oh, this is weird, and then they forget about it because you can't make a living in science doing things that nobody understands. You can't publish papers that way. So it's not good for your career. You want to stay on the beaten path. You get too far off the beaten path, and your peers will give you a hard time. That's the problem with academia. They're kind of locked into the status quo in many respects, and it's very hard for them to give up their fundamentals that their whole concept of science and reality has been based on since Newton. We still live in a Newtonian mindset in physics is the problem, and it's hard for people to give that up and realize that this is this reality is based on information, not on mass. It's based on information. It's a digital reality. So that's how it is. I know subjectively, which is just my knowledge, but I know that just as well as I know where I live and how to get home, and what my name is and my address, that kind of thing. I know just as clearly that your consciousness and physical death is of no consequence to you. It's just part of what I call an experience packet, and you need multiple experience packets because otherwise the system doesn't work. It dead ends. It ends up in a logical, blind alley. It can't progress. So you have to have multiple experience packets for the logic to flow.
So reincarnation is part of the My Big Toe theory. It's explained logically.
Yeah, reincarnation is a necessary, logical step in this process. You see, as is an afterlife. And you talk about afterlife, that means you were alive, and then after you die, you're alive again. Well, this is just a virtual reality. It's the afterlife of your elf in World of Warcraft. You can say, does your elf have an afterlife? Well, yeah, he keeps right on playing. Every time he gets killed, he gets right back out there and keeps on playing, because otherwise the game wouldn't be much fun. You can't do it all without learning, without growing. This elf isn't going to do much his first time out when he's a level 1 or something. It takes more effort, more skill, more trials, and that takes many lifetimes to get there.
Would you say, you mentioned many of the scientists who have done impeccable scientific protocols on these various paranormal things, such as Dean Radin and the work of William Tiller, different organizations, PAIR, the Rhine Institute, Duke University. Would you say that the results that they have gathered is a validation of your virtual reality theory?
Well, yes, in the same way. Virtual reality explains those results logically. See, they can't explain the results. All they can do is say it exists. I measured this, and here's what I got. I had this person, and I showed him 300 cards that had a triangle, a plus sign, or a zero on it. And 85% of the time, he could tell me what random card I pulled up. This is some of the things J.B. Rhine did, 40 years ago. And he could do that 75 or 80% of the time. And if it were random guessing, you see, and I was pulling out 3 different kinds of things, then he shouldn't be able to get it right, but a third of the time, because it's any one of the 3 that I pulled out, he has a 1 in 3 chance of guessing and getting it right. It's random. If a random generator came up with the answers, it would a third of the time get them right. Well, he doesn't do it a third of the time. He does it 80% of the time. Well, Ryan found that sort of thing. Some people were very good at it. Well, you only need one exception to blow a hole in the rule. You see, if the rule is that's impossible, because nobody could know what's on this random card that was drawn out of a randomized deck. That's impossible. That's paranormal. That's not normal, you see. So it only has to happen one time that one person gets a 80 or 90% score, and that person the next day gets an 80% score, and the next day, it's consistent. It's not like, wow, that person was really lucky that day, and now they can't do anything. He had people who were good at this. And he published his stuff, and he did careful research. And so do all these other people. Look at the protocols of Pear Labs. They have looked at their error sources down to the most minute detail. They know exactly what they're doing. Their protocols and their science is tighter and better than almost any physics done in any physics lab anywhere, because they know that nobody will believe the results, because the results are not normal, you see. So they say, well, people aren't going to believe this. Let's go back and check our work. And they've done this now for decades. And what's the probability? Look at statistics, and things have a statistical probability of that they could have been random. Well, maybe they just guessed, or maybe it was random. Okay, so they call this statistical significance test. Well, the test at Pear Labs, if you'll hear it, if you go to Pear Labs, www.pearlabs.org, you go to that place, and they will have a little video there. And he will explain to you that if you take all of their experiments together, the probability that their results are in error somehow is less than 1 in a billion. Nobody does research to a statistical probability of 1 in a billion. If you get 1 in 100, it's good. That's considered excellent research. If you get 1 in 1,000, it's very, very good. 1 in 10,000, it's a fact. Nobody will question it. They're getting 1 in a billion, you see. That's because they've done these experiments so many times. And they've done them very carefully. So, yes, it's not a question, do these things exist? Can this be done? Is there such thing as a placebo effect? Of course there is. If you can't beat the placebo effect, you can't market your drug. That's how serious it is. Of course these things exist. And no, the objective reality model has no explanation. They are not normal, which means they don't fit under the objective reality, logic flow. They're not logical to objective reality. Well, they are logical to the My Big Toe, logical theory. So the My Big Toe theory is better science. It's more inclusive. It doesn't throw anything out. It doesn't say all the present physics is bogus. It says the present physics is just a subset. That always works that way. Newtonian physics, became just a subset of a greater understanding when quantum mechanics and relativity came along. They didn't throw out Newtonian physics. Everybody out in the non-academic world is still doing Newtonian physics, because we don't deal with things that small or that fast that we need quantum mechanics or relativity. Mostly in in industry, if you will, out in the non-academic world. So it's still valid. Just because Newtonian physics isn't exactly right, it's right enough. Well, that's the way relativity and quantum mechanics are. You see, it's the same thing. Now they become a subset that is a very good approximation within that part of our reality where the uncertainty is small. Well, where is it the uncertainty is small? Well, that's what we call hard science. That's where you have small uncertainty. You know how long it takes a ball dropped from this height to hit the ground, and you can measure it to 4 decimal places. You see? So the uncertainty is very small there. They're called hard sciences. And that's where an assumption of an objective reality works well. It's a good approximation in that subset of low uncertainty. Okay, you take soft sciences like psychology or sociology or economics. These are people-based sciences, right? And there's a lot more uncertainty. How long does it take an individual to get angry? Well, that could vary a lot. We can't calculate it. Like, how long does it take a ball to fall, a meter? It's got a lot of uncertainty around it. There's a lot of other variables and things going on. We're not so sure about that. That's called soft science. You see? So they don't, physics isn't real good at psychology. Physics isn't really good at economics, you see, because it just works in the hard science world where you have low uncertainties. And what we're saying is that the My Big Toe theory, it's a bigger theory that can see, quantum mechanics, relativity, Newtonian physics, they all are subsets of a larger reality. They all work fine within their own approximation of reality in their own way. But if you want to understand things like the placebo effect or the results of Pear Labs or J.B. Rhine's work or Dean Radin's work, if you want to get a bigger picture and say, how is it that that mother knew her son was hurt? You know, woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, knew her baby was in trouble. How did she know that? That's impossible. That means it must be paranormal. Oh no, you know. We don't want any of that stuff because that undermines our objective theory, you know, of how the world works. So here you have a theory that takes all of that stuff in. What's consciousness? Well, physics, biology, you know, they can't derive consciousness. They can't say, here's how consciousness is created. They have some theories, mostly they don't work very well. You know, they haven't come to any kind of what we'd call scientific, logical ending yet, and they won't because it's not true. Physical reality does not create consciousness. You see, it's wrong. So that's why they're having trouble, because they're trying to prove something that's not so. So this is also a theory of consciousness, if you will. It's ontology. It's a theory of being. It's epistemology. It's a theory of knowledge. So it's all these things. It's theology. It's a theory of what is it that's larger than ourselves? What is that that's bigger, bigger than just this, us, and this physical reality? What's that? What's the source? Okay, this is a virtual reality. Who's the programmer? How did it get here? Where did it come from? Why is it here? What are the rules? What is it doing? It answers all those questions. It answers the questions like, why am I here? What is my purpose in being here? It answers those questions too. You see? So it's all of that. It's theology, it's metaphysics, and it's physics. And it's all one logical theory that flows from two assumptions, just two assumptions, and it subsumes physics, biology, chemistry, all the hard sciences are approximations within this larger thing in their area. Just like Newtonian physics is a good approximation in its area of where it works, and the flat Earth is a good approximation in its realm of short distances. If you're only going to measure a mile, you're going to assume the Earth's flat. You don't need to worry about the curvature of the Earth in a mile. You see, it's in the 12th decimal place or something. It's not important. Well, that's the way it is with this theory. You see, it's the bigger theory that explains consciousness. It explains the subjective as well as the objective. And people say, well, that's impossible. Subjective is just private. Yes, but it explains that subjective. Why it's private. Where does it come from? How does it work? Why does it get what it gets? Why do 5 people go on an out-of-body experience? They all come back and report different things. Why is that? Why is it so inconsistent? Well, it explains all that. You see? So it explains why things are subjective, how the subjective reality works, and how it sometimes appears to be objective. So that gets us back to the original question, which is, how do you know that there's this afterlife and life continues? Well, you see, there's two things. There's an objective answer to that. Well, because it's part of a larger theory that works better than any other, and so far hasn't really been found to have any problems with it. The second one is my own subjective experience, for whatever that's worth. You see, so that's why I say it, and I say it like, yeah, here's the way it is, and here's what happens, because it's a necessary, logical step in a larger process that so far has validated itself.
Well, you asked, what is that worth? Your subjective experience. Well, I would have to answer, it must be worth a lot. You studied with Bob Monroe, and you conducted many experiments, you and Bob and Dennis Menerick, in the early days of the Monroe Institute. You started off as a consciousness researcher. You were a physicist and then developed this big toe. Right. But your experience in this subjective reality, your experience with consciousness is vast. I think people should, who are listening to this interview, who haven't perhaps heard some of your other interviews or are new to your work, your My Big Toe developed from all of these experiences you had. I think your experience is greater than anyone else I can think of as far as your out-of-body travels, your extensive experience with other virtual realities. The reason that you were able to develop this big toe is this experience in these other virtual realities.
That's true. I couldn't have figured this out from the outside. It had to be an inside job. In other words, if I had had no experience with the larger consciousness system, I would never have been able to come up with the concepts of this. Now, I can present them to other people and they can see it and see how it works and whatever, but to come up with the idea and see how it all fit together and what the logic of it was took a long time. I worked on this for 35, 40 years doing research in the non-physical mostly to try to make it consistent, understand it. When you just go into some place you've never been before and you don't really understand it, that doesn't make it repeatable. That doesn't make it science just because you went in and looked around. You have to really do research there. You have to take notes. You have to observe. You have to, it needs to become repeatable. It needs to become dependable. And the way you understand it, it's like, understanding anything else. You have to become kind of a part of it before you can understand it. So it did take a lot of research in the larger consciousness system to be able to figure out how all the pieces went together. Because once you get into the shall we say, the mystical realm or the spiritual realm, and you start reading the literature and looking at things, there's such a hodgepodge. There's such a collection of things that don't have any underlying logic behind them. They're just, this group says, well, we have 7 chakras, and these 7 chakras do this and that. And some other group, they don't have any chakras. They've got other kinds of things. And, it just goes on and on and on that you see that it's so varied. There's so much belief-based and ritual-based stuff to it that you just can't take that at face value. You have to go out and say, well, how does this really work? Are those chakras necessary? Are they logically necessary? Or are they just, metaphors for something else that's behind them? And that takes a lot of time before you sort all this stuff out. And the only way you can do that is to go there and do the experiments. See what's fundamental and what's not, what's repeatable, because the larger reality is consistent. It does have its own rules, its own logic, the way it works, just like this physical reality does. And it takes a while, though, to dig those out. So, yes, that's true. It does take time. But on the other hand, looking at it the other way, I would never want anybody to believe what I say just because I say it, just because I tell you that. And I tell people at the end of my workshops all the time, don't believe what I tell you, because then that's impotent as far as your growth goes. You can't do anything useful with a belief. All right, so you believe what I say. Now what are you going to do? How does that help you grow and understand something, at your own gut level, at your own level of being? What's that do for you? You have a belief. It doesn't do anything for you. So the point is, you need to have an open mind, and you need to be skeptical, and you need to go experience it for yourself. It's not that hard. You want to heal people with your mind. It's not that hard. Yes, there are rules, there are limitations, there are ways that reality works and doesn't work. You're not a wizard making lightning come down on your enemies. It's not like the Hollywood version of reality at all. but you have to just go do it. And if you want to experience these things and you want to learn for yourself, it's just not that hard to do. It's something that you can do. The first steps to doing that are you have to learn to let go of your fear, you have to learn to let go of your beliefs, and you have to learn to let go of your ego. And if you're successful at those three things, those are the things that will get in your way. Those are the things that will make it difficult for you to learn. And as you get rid of those three things, then it becomes much easier. It becomes natural. It's not hard. But in as much as you have fear, beliefs, and ego, then it's difficult because you keep running into this fear, you keep running into this ego, and your beliefs are limiting. Because you believe something can't be that way, then all the evidence you get to the contrary, you immediately throw out as having something wrong with it. What's wrong with it is it doesn't conform to your beliefs. That's what's wrong with it. Well, your beliefs become a limitation, so you got to get rid of them. Your fear will keep you from experiencing the larger consciousness system. Your fear of death, your fear of, being foolish, your fear of being wrong. You have all kinds of fears of things. Your fear of what other people will say, and you got to let all that fear go. You have to have the courage to go explore honestly, like a scientist on your own. And of course, ego is just a product of fear. So if you get rid of the fear, really the ego goes too. And what ego does to get in the way is rather than seeing things as they are, you see things as you wish them to be. You see things in a way that satisfies the image you have of yourself and of your reality. So that constantly gets in your way of seeing the truth. You can't see the truth if you're wearing these colored glasses that, and warped glasses at that, funhouse glasses with various colors does not show you the truth. You see, and that's what your ego and fear and beliefs do. They put these glasses on that have all kinds of bent shapes on the lenses and different colors that come and go, and you're looking for the truth. Well, it's hard to find the truth when you've got all of that junk in your way. So that's the thing, the fear, the ego, and the beliefs have to go first. And then it becomes much simpler. So rather than say, I want to go out of body and experience this, that's really starting in the middle. It's getting the cart in front of the horse. To start with, you should say, how do I find my fear, beliefs and ego? How do I find them in order to get rid of them? I don't have any fear. I don't have any beliefs. I don't have any ego. A lot of people say that, particularly young men. They feel that way. Well, you have a lot of fear that you don't know you have. You have beliefs that are just cultural. It's not that you sat down and somebody taught them to you. It's just you just grew up with them. That's the way it is. We feel that way about an objective reality. Well, of course reality is objective. What else could it be? Look, here I am. See the chair. It's hard. It's objective. What's the matter with you? You see, we have that as a cultural belief. And we get lots of beliefs. We get beliefs from our families. We get beliefs from our culture. We get beliefs from lots of things. And we don't know that we have them. We have a belief that we can't make something happen without doing anything. We have a belief that mind can't affect matter. That matter is at the core of everything. Matter is the thing. Matter is the substance. And then we have a science that says, there really isn't any matter. These are just probability distributions. And then some other physicist says, that doesn't make sense. This is crazy science. We'll never understand that. You say, well, of course you won't understand it as long as you have those beliefs. They get in the way. So that's been the problem. Quantum mechanics has been now going on since the mid-1920s. And you have guys like Richard Feynman, who were brilliant quantum mechanics theorists, making statements like, nobody will ever understand this. This is impossible. Well, if that's your belief, that's what you'll find, because you'll never be able to think out of the box far enough to see the bigger picture. So that's the problem. So don't start with wanting to heal somebody with your mind or, going out of body or remote viewing. Those are interesting and fun things to do on the side, and it would be helpful to play with those gently. Don't force it, but work on your fear, ego, belief. That's the key. That's where you really need to start. Find them. Easy to find. Easy to find. All you have to do is think about any time you feel aggravated, upset, annoyed, angry. Has anybody ever felt any of those emotions in the last week, in the last day, in the last hour? Most of us would say, yeah, I feel those all the time. Well, that's ego. Without the ego, you wouldn't be feeling those things. You wouldn't be upset. You wouldn't be trying to manipulate the world to be the way you want it. See? So look for those kinds of things, those sorts of feelings, those kinds of issues. Are you not living in joy and happiness? Is life not just, a wonderful blast? Well, that's the fear and belief in ego, is why it isn't. So look at those things that make you feel uneasy, that anger you, that aggravate you, and you will find an ego sitting there. It's not the way I want it. It's not the way it should be. This isn't fair. It isn't right. This is stupid, you see. That's all your ego talking. So that's where you start. When you start feeling those things, you say, well, why do I feel that way? Why is this not the way it should be? Well, that's obvious. It ought to be this way. Well, that starts from the belief that you know everything. And that's a bad assumption to start with. So that's kind of the, how is it that I know that this is the way it is? Well, one, it's better science. This is one of the necessary logical requirements of a logical chain that ends up doing better physics. And personally, because it's really not that hard to find out for yourself, you can have your awareness travel in these other reality frames, including the transition frame. You can follow the process. You can be a part of the process. It's not that hard to do.
Thank you. You were recently interviewed along with Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, who wrote Biology of Belief. Something he said in that interview, immortality is a given. The body is a virtual reality suit. He made these discoveries, and I know you had a lot to talk about in between the interviews, and he was delighted that your big toe provided an explanation for his findings.
Yes, that's true, and I was delighted as well. You see, my big toe gave a theoretical foundation underneath what he had discovered, what he had found in his study of biology. So he studied biology, he came to these conclusions, but just like the conclusions that C is a constant and that particles are probability distributions and that reverse causality seems to be able to work and so on, there was no real understanding of why these conclusions would have to be this way. What was the basic underlying foundation? So my big toe builds a logical structure underneath his results. It kind of says, oh yeah, that's the way yeah, Bruce, you're right. That's exactly the way the world works. You've got it. Of course, immortality is a given. We're consciousness. We're not physical bodies. That's just a virtual reality, you see. And he gets that theory then from the ground up, which is he got to those conclusions basically from the top, working down. And I was thrilled to find Bruce, of course, because it's what Bruce has been able to show in biology is just another instance where good science measurement supports, my big toe theory. So he gives me an instance of somebody going out and doing science experiments that say that my big toe theory has it nailed right on the head, that the results that I see are the results that he sees from his experiment. So we're good for each other. He produces an example of science validating my theory, and I give him a scientific foundation for which he can base his results on. So it was a mutual loving. We had a good time talking with each other. Bruce is a really neat guy, and he had realized this just through the way basically life works. He looked at the process of What is life? Well, it's a collection of cells, right? That's what it seems like, this collection of cells. And how do these cells work? How do they know what they're doing? Where are they getting their information from? And he realized that also that the basic fundamental thing going on there was information. It was all about information. That these little cells and their structures and their communities, if you were, their primary function was to pass information. And see, I'm talking about a reality that's basically composed of information. You see, we fit on almost everything. And then he got down to a point where he talked about the immune response, that everybody's cells are ID'd, to them. These cells are yours. You put these cells into anybody else and they will reject them. These cells are personal to you. And from that and the way that works and how they could take these cells and snip off parts of them that are like parts of the information processors, and now they weren't any longer personal to you. Now they could be put in anybody and accepted. Well, what was the difference? Well, the difference was, this information, you see. So then your identity is tied to information within cells and so on. So he came to similar conclusions based on an entirely different viewpoint. So that was a lot of fun talking with Bruce.
It must have been. One of his premises is you are not your DNA. You're not a victim of your genetics. How does that fit with...
Yes, that's exactly so. You're not a victim of your genetics. You're actually not a victim of anything. The way the larger world works, and for those of you who are just listening to this like for the first time, this is your introduction to Tom Campbell's Big Toe. I've skipped a lot of steps here because I can't go back and fill in all the fundamental framework of this theory every time I talk. So there'll be things that you will hear that are like, well, where'd that come from? That seems like a crazy or a wild assumption. You have to go back to the beginning. Go back to YouTube and look at. I shouldn't say hundreds of things, but probably almost that many now. I've got at least 50 or 60 videos up there, and particularly look at the one I did in Calgary or the one that I did in Spain last year. And this will give you a much firmer grounding. And a lot of the things I'm saying now that seem like they're jumping off the wall, it's because I've explained them other places and I can't keep explaining the groundwork and the details every time I talk. So if you're getting this for the first or second time and it doesn't make sense to you, go back and get the background that develops it and does more of the derivation of it, and you will have most of your questions answered that way. But back to the question, is you're not a victim in any case. The way this works is that stuff happens, you deal with it, period. That's the nature of this reality. We are here as units of consciousness to evolve the quality of our consciousness. And a more technical way of saying that is to decrease the entropy of our consciousness. Okay? Entropy is a word that talks about a measure of disorder. Lowering entropy, decreasing entropy means less disorder, more information. Information is ordered bits. Random bits carry no information. So that's the point. We're here to lower the entropy of our consciousness. And another way, grow up. Spiritual growth, personal growth, all those things could be, it could be called, I call it decreasing the entropy of the consciousness or increasing the quality of the consciousness. So that's what we're doing. We're units of consciousness evolving. The larger consciousness system is evolving. And one of the ways that optimizes this evolution is to put a unit of consciousness like us in a situation where it makes choices. And it can evolve by the quality of those choices. That's what this virtual reality is that we call our physical universe. Okay? It's an experiential place where there are rules. The rules give us structure. The structure gives us very specific choices with very specific results, and we make choices. And then our life is affected by those choices. We grow up or we grow down. We evolve or de-evolve based on the quality of our choices. And that's what it's all about. Stuff happens, you deal with it. You deal with it by making choices. Some choices are better than others. Some lower your entropy and increase your quality better than others. Okay, so if you want to know what all that means, the entropy, the quality, and so on, go back to the beginning and read some of the more introductory stuff. But that's what it is. So how can you be a victim? See, how is it can you be a victim? You deal with whatever you have to deal with. It's not about how much money you can hoard, how much beer you can drink, how many people like you, how popular. It's not about any of those things. It's not about how clever you are. It's not about how much intellectual knowledge you have. It's not about any of those things. It's about you making good choices, you growing up. So whatever situation you're in, however traumatic it seems to you, you have choices. And you probably have more choices than you know you have. There are probably lots of choices outside of your awareness because that belief, fear, and ego tends to limit your reality and limit your choices. Oh, I couldn't do that because, that wouldn't be good for me, or, I couldn't do that. That was, that's against my beliefs. Oh, I'm too afraid to do that. You say you limit yourself with these things, and so you probably have a lot more choices than you think. But in any case, there is a certain number of choices that you can be aware of. There's more that you're not aware of, okay? So just the ones you're aware of. Okay, here's something's happened, stuff has happened, I have to deal with it by making choices, and I can only think of 10 choices. All right, what is free will? Free will is my ability to choose among those 10 choices. Even if there are really 100 choices, another 90 choices that I don't know about because I get so much belief and fear and ego, I only know about these 10. Well, I have the free will to choose among those 10. That's free will. Okay, many people think that free will is getting everything you want. I couldn't possibly have free will, or I'd be rich and handsome and, and famous and all that sort of thing, but that's not what free will is about. So if you're in a reality frame where your job isn't to, be happy, really, it's to learn. It's to grow up. It's not about being happy. It's about learning and growing up, making good choices. A good choice is a choice that lowers the entropy of your consciousness. More information, less randomness. Okay? More love. See, love is a low entropy consciousness. It's defined as love. So it's another way to say it, you're trying to become love. That's your same thing as increase the quality of your consciousness. So that's what you're doing. So here you are, you have choices. You have a free will to pick of the ones that you know about. And if you pick one that, the way I'm going to deal with this is scream and holler and, punch somebody. That's how I'm going to deal with this. Well, that's on your way to de-evolving. You see, there are better choices that make you become love, much better than getting angry and punching somebody. So you have to find those other choices. But if you have too much ego and too much fear and too many beliefs, you may have a hard struggle with that, and that's why most of us are struggling. This reality tends to be a struggle. We struggle with it because we're struggling with our fear, ego, and beliefs, our needs, our wants, our desires. All that stuff is a struggle for us all the time. That's why our life isn't full of joy and happiness, and we don't feel good about things because we have too much fear, beliefs, and expectations. All that ego stuff. So that's the point. There is no situation where you go, oh, I can't help it. Everything's just so unfair. I don't get any breaks. My job's over. My wife left me. My children don't like me. What's the point? And you're a victim of everything. You're a victim of circumstance. You're a victim of your genetics. You're a victim of, your race, your religion, your creed. You're a victim of everything. Well, some of these things may actually be true in the sense that these things are difficult. These things make your life difficult. Well, if you see yourself as a victim, you've already taken the wrong step as far as outgrowing the problem. Seeing yourself as a victim is an act of ego. Whatever it is that you face, you just face it and deal with it with love. It's a low entropy consciousness. dealing with love, then things will get better and better, and pretty soon your life will be one of joy and happiness and contentment. Okay? That's the way it works. Won't happen on the first hour, the first day, but it's a lifelong thing, right? But so, Bruce and I had a really good time. I agree completely with his idea about how you're not a victim of your genes. A lot of people will feel like they're a victim of their genetics, because we have taught this idea that your genetics is what creates your physical person, and that's where your limitations are. You're only so smart, you're only so fast, you're only so strong, you're only so good looking, you're only so whatever, all these important things, and you're limited by your genetics. You're like a prisoner given this monkey suit, and you don't like this monkey suit. It's not smart enough or good looking enough or strong enough or resilient or robust enough, and that's your whole problem. And people who get into that mindset, that's just wrong. You modify your genetics all the time. Genetics aren't absolute. Genetics give you a foundation. Genetics create a foundation, but within that foundation, you can do all sorts of things. You can change that genetic material. You can modify what chromosomes get turned on and get turned off, and how that genetic plays out. How that genetic foundation plays out in your life is very changeable, and it's we are fundamentally consciousness, and our physical bodies are just this virtual reality created by consciousness for us to play in and experience in. So consciousness leads, the body follows. And in my talks, I sometimes talk about sheep morality, which is a good example of this. It was found that sheep had moral behavior because they would take care of another's lamb, feed it, nurse it, treat it as their own. And the biologists wouldn't understand that because there was no genetic advantage. Now the milk that was available to their own lambs was being shared with some other lamb that was not part of their genetics. So why were they doing that? Okay, well, that comes under moral behavior. And that was such a surprise that the scientists looked at the sheep brains and said, oh, well, look, here's this little lobe on this part of the brain, which is where moral behavior is. That's the way it is in our brain. We have this little lobe at this kind of location, and that's where our moral behavior processing gets done. So what happened is there were random mutations. The sheep brain grew a little lobe right in that spot that could now support moral behavior, so the sheep started having morality. You see, the physical driving the consciousness. It works just the opposite. The sheep making good choices became moral. And as the sheep learned and grew up, because they're just like us, they're trying to grow up to become love. They're trying to grow up. They have a different set of, they're not as challenged as we are in many ways, but that's a different experience for a different set. So in their growing up process, they learn to care about lambs that were abandoned and take care of them just because it was the right thing to do. And because of that, their brain had to grow a little lobe back here in that place to support that, you see? Because that's the way it works. So it's the consciousness leads, the body follows. So you could have said, well, those lambs, they didn't have that lobe, they were genetically locked in. Oh, they were victims. Why didn't they eat that little lamb, or why didn't they shoo it away, kick it, kill it? Wasn't going to take any of their valuable milk that they were having for their own genetic offspring. Well, they did better than that. You see, they didn't need that lobe. That's consciousness. Lambs are conscious. They're growing, evolving as well. So they evolve, and then the body changes to support that in the physical. In the virtual reality, you have to have something here to support it, because that's the nature of our virtual reality. That's the way the rule set works. So now we get this little lobe in sheep brains that supports their moral behavior. So you see, that's an example of you're not a victim of your genetics. You get to modify that genetics. Now, when those sheep reproduce, Well, they'll have a little gene there to produce a little load there, you see, for the behavior. It becomes part of the species. This is how we grow up. This is how our cultures grow up. This is how we grow up. It's up to us to change. We're not locked in because we have a certain genetic source and that's it. We're done. You see, we're in a world here where we have a lot of control over how we develop, what we are. We can affect things in this physical reality with our intent. That's how the placebo effect works. It's how the reverse causality works. It's how a lot of these things, work. It's how the Tiller's experiments work. It's intent affects the probable reality, probable future. A lot more detail on this. Go to the other videos that are more detailed, and you'll find that there. So Bruce was absolutely right. That idea that our genetics is a locked-in trap, and that that's just the way we are. I got an extra Y chromosome, so I'm just violent. That's all. Okay. Well, you may have an extra Y chromosome, and that may be unusual. And that may mean that people with that may have a statistical tendency to be more violent, but that's your challenge. Don't go, woe is me, I can't help it. Outgrow it, overcome it. And you will find out that maybe one day that extra Y chromosome, a miracle occurs, and it either just doesn't bother you or it goes away. You see? And everybody said, well, that's impossible. It can't go away. If it was there, it's always going to be there. Well, that's objective science thinking that it knows how the world works. Almost nothing is impossible. Almost everything is possible. The mind leads, intent leads, and the body follows.
You've said in the past, I think in another interview of ours, we talked about the consequences of how we live our life and the choices that you make. You've discussed and pointed out some people in history who were particularly violent and made a lot of bad choices, and such as Hitler's or Alexander the Great's or things like that. We are taught mostly by religious traditions of the consequences of bad behavior. A lot of fear, a lot of fire and brimstone. What is the real seriousness of consequences of how we live our life for someone living with a lot of not good choices? Obviously, the people in history who have done that, and a lot of the things that have happened in history are obvious, but for someone in everyday life, what is an incentive, a motivator for making the best choices you can from the big picture that you describe?
Okay. Well, first of all, we'll go back and restate the idea that the reason we're here, we are consciousness. We're individuated units of consciousness. We're experiencing this virtual reality that we call our physical universe, so that we can have experience that gives us choices, which allows us to grow up, become love, increase the quality of our consciousness, decrease the entropy of our consciousness. Okay, this is our purpose for being here, is to evolve. Why do we want to evolve? Because if we don't evolve, we'll de-evolve. You can't stay the same. It's a large, complex system, this larger consciousness system, and it has two choices. It can evolve or it can de-evolve. So it evolves or dies. If it dies, it means that it loses information, becomes more random, and eventually, if that keeps up, it doesn't exist anymore. There is no information. It's gone, dead. So like anything else, it wants to evolve, continue growing, continue becoming. And staying the same is really not an option. Any big complex system that's changing like this will eventually evolve or de-evolve. This balancing between the two is temporary. Oh, it might do it for an eon or two, but see, we're talking about, our view of time is very small here. So it eventually is going to end up one way or another. So it's evolve or die. So what are we doing here? We're part of this larger consciousness system strategy for evolution. It's thinking, oh, how can I evolve? How can I keep from dissolving into nothing? Well, I could create these virtual realities and have parts of myself in there interacting, making choices, growing up and evolving. This would be like a schoolhouse to help consciousness evolve. Because when it's just passing information around, you don't get a lot of choices. It's all cerebral, it's all just information. Where here in this virtual reality, there's all these, choices that we have to make all the time. So it's a great place to learn. It's a much better place to learn than anywhere else. So the consciousness system evolves a virtual reality so that it's a tool for its own evolution. It's an experience space for its own evolution. Okay, so that's the point to start with. All right, now, so here you are, a unit of consciousness. Your mission is to evolve. And you don't want to. I don't want to evolve. That's a lot of work. I just want to drink beer, watch television, and, just get out of my life. I'm happy the way I am, sort of thing. Why should I worry about choices? I'll do whatever I damn well want, and everybody else can just deal with it. They can evolve and deal with what I want, That's just ego talking, obviously. And what's the downside of that? What do you get for that? Well, and that's kind of more of a daily thing. You could also say, what's the downside of being an Adolf Hitler? What happens? Does Adolf Hitler get strung up in this afterlife and tortured for, so many centuries for all his bad behavior? No, it's not like that. There is no punishment for what you do. You don't get punished for being, for de-evolving. Or if we put it a different way, your punishment for de-evolving is de-evolving. You see, that's your punishment. You're not really punished in the sense that some other being comes out and whacks you on the backside or locks you in a jail or puts you in hell, lets you burn, or all these things are basically fear-based things to help organizations manipulate people. But what happens is if you de-evolve, you don't evolve. Okay, you say, well, that's not so bad. I don't need to evolve, I'm happy the way it is. I'm rich, I got a lot of money, I can boss people around and whatever. Well, it's like this. Here we are in this learning lab. It's very much like we're in kindergarten. So here we are in kindergarten. Teacher comes around, we take crayons, we draw big stick figures and this sort of thing. That's kind of the level we are here. And we spend a whole lifetime here in kindergarten. And then we get old and we transfer to, we get out of this particular experience packet, but we haven't learned much, so we get another experience packet and we try again. And we spend that whole lifetime in kindergarten. We just draw pictures of stick man and, that kind of thing. And we throw spitballs at the other students. We steal their toys, we spit on the floor, we do all that kind of stuff. And we get another life packet. And, we stay in kindergarten, we throw more spitballs. Well, you see the point of this? Okay, here you are now. Add all your lifetimes and you're 3,000 years old. You're still in kindergarten, drawing pictures of stick people and throwing spitballs. All right, what's wrong with this picture? You're saying, what's the deal here? What's the punishment? The punishment is you're still in kindergarten. You see, you're still acting like an idiot in kindergarten. You're still throwing spitballs, spitting on the floor, pulling the little girl's hair, the pigtail in front of you, and you're not learning, you're not growing. And this school that we're in doesn't pass you along because you're a year older. This school you're in passes you along when you grow up, when you increase the quality of your consciousness. So you may have had 1,000 lifetimes and you're still throwing spitballs and pulling little girls' pigtails. You see? That's the problem. You're not growing up. You're not helping grip an oar and row the boat. You're a drag on the rest of us, you see? Well, what happens to you when you're playing your Sims, your World of Warcraft, and you've got a player, and that player just can't evolve. Now, what does evolve mean in World of Warcraft? It means collect hit points or go up levels. You see, it's that sort of thing. And you can't get this elf to go up a level to save you. You know, every time he gets in a scrape, somebody, you know, kills him, or he gets hurt, or he runs away, or something. You just don't find this character to be very useful. Well, what happened? You stop playing him. He's not pulling his fair share. You just stop playing him. It's not, as long as there is a good potential that this character may get it one day and, you know, evolve through the game, well, you'll keep him active and you'll play him some. But when you get to the point where you say, there's just not much potential there, you know? 5,000 years in kindergarten and he's still pulling hair and throwing spitballs, you know? This isn't working out. Well, this is a digital reality in a simulation. You as an individuated unit of consciousness are digital content. All the feelings, all the knowledge, all the thoughts, all the choices, it's all there. And if it's just not working out, well, you know, what do you do with that character? You just put him over aside. You don't play him, maybe. Your computer gets a little full. I'll delete that guy. I don't need those bits. They're not productive bits. Let me delete that now. I'm only allowed so many characters here, you know, so I'm going to delete that. Well, that's the downside of not getting into the game and playing it. You see, is that you don't succeed. It's not that you're going to be punished and people are, you know, okay, you're Adolf Hitler, you killed, you know, 6 million Jews and you know, invaded 15 countries and, you know, murdered millions. So you need to be, you know, beaten by all the victims, you know, for the rest of your existence and burn in hell and all the rest of it. No, you just need to grow up. That was all about ego and belief. Desire, want, need. It was all about power, you see. It's all about the wrong things. Well, that's the wrong stuff. You just need to let that go and grow up. It's not that you're punished. Your punishment is lack of progress, lack of growth. And how does that play out in this reality? Well, when you're not growing, that means you have a lot of fear, you have a lot of ego, have a lot of beliefs, expectations, wants, needs, desires, all that stuff. And what do all these things do for you? They make you unhappy. You're not happy throwing spitballs. You're not happy just jerking little girls' pigtails. It amuses you for a while. You're not happy being rich, collecting a lot of, you know, getting all the marbles. You know, you're not happy bullying other people and stealing their chocolate milk at lunchtime, you know. Yes, that's fun for a while, but then it gets old and it's just nowhere and you get very unhappy. Your life is miserable. And because you're miserable, people around you are miserable. And you're all miserable together and you make something that looks a whole lot like, you know, a weekday afternoon soap opera. You know, there's all these miserable people wringing their hands over the fact that they're all shooting themselves and each other in the foot all the time with bad decisions. And that's the way you live. And you come back for another life packet and that's the way you live. You see? So you've got this feeling, life sucks, it's so hard, it's so miserable. I can't seem to get ahead, I can't this. You know, where's the love, where's the grace, where's these things? I don't find the joy. It's because you're not creating the love, the grace, and the joy. That's yours to create, not yours to be given. You see, you have to earn it. You earn it by growing up. So that's the downside. If you don't grow up, you're miserable, you're unhappy, you're unfulfilled, you are irritable, you're grumpy, you're full of fear, you're full of beliefs, and you generally have a very unhappy, tough life. And it doesn't matter whether you're wealthy or poor. You can be wealthy and be miserable and have a tough life. Just because you have a few $1 million in the bank doesn't make you happy. Scrooge McDuck was the only one I know of that it made him happy. He used to go dive right into his pool of gold, and he loved it. But that's not what makes people happy. Happy is a byproduct of a life well lived. That's happy. It's not something that you force the world to give you. It's not something you can buy. It's the product of a life well lived. If you don't live your life well, if you don't make good choices, you won't find happiness even if you do find money. You see, it's not the point. Even if you do find comfort, that's not the point. So, why shouldn't you just sit back and to hell with it? There is no hell, there is no heaven. I'm just this person going around and trying to grow up. I don't want to play the damn game. I'm just going to hang out. Well, you can do that, but you've got a couple of risks. One is, eventually, if you're not functional in the game, you won't be played. You'll just disappear as an individuated unit of consciousness. There's no point in keeping you around. Delete the bits and go on with those who are productive. Now, that's not going to happen unless your potential is gone. The fact that you make a lot of bad choices and don't do well, that's expected. It's a tough game. It's a hard game. You're expected to make mistakes. You're expected not to do well. But if you continue to try and work on it, and you have a desire to better yourself, then you have potential. As long as you have potential, you're in the game. You get to the point you have no more potential for growing up, there's no point in keeping you around. So that's one downside. The other downside is you make yourself and everybody around you miserable. You won't be happy. You won't find joy. You won't find peace. Your life will be a struggle. And most of that struggle will be full of stomach acid and venom and discomfort and anger and victimhood and all of these other things that make you miserable. So that's the other, that's the second big downside. I mean, these seem pretty serious downsides to me, if we're not saying, well, no heaven, no hell, and I'll just hang out, well, there's a downside to hanging out. So this is the game you're in, like it or not. You making no choice is a choice. And if you refuse to make good choices and don't care, you won't do very well. And if you don't do very well, you'll make yourself miserable. So if that's what you enjoy, is struggle and misery, have at it. When your potential's gone, you won't have to deal with it anymore because you no longer exist. Your little piece of consciousness will be, rebooted into something more profitable for the system. So if you want to grow up and learn the ways of consciousness, not be just limited to this physical reality, travel beyond it. You see, there's a whole bigger reality here. Mastering this physical reality is just step one. Then you can go on beyond that. I mean, it's not the limitation of just being, okay, I'm a cool dude in physical reality, I've made it. That's not it. There's lots of growth past this little virtual reality game. There's lots of other things to do and become. You need to become love. You see? So there's no end to the process. The larger consciousness system is still evolving. It's not like it's a fixed target. It's not like, oh, well, I'll just get to this point and I'll be done. There won't be anything else for me to learn. There's always more for you to learn. The system is learning. The system is growing. You're part of a living, growing system. Just like your liver is part of a living, growing system. And if your liver just said, I'm done. Look, all I do is process blood. I take out these contaminants. I take out all this nasty stuff. And what do? They just stuff more stuff in there. All the pollution, all the additives and preservatives and chemicals and the food and all this garbage. I quit. This guy's just too dumb, to eat right. He gives me all this garbage and my job's to filter the blood. Well, if he would try, I would try. But all I get's this junk. I get this garbage. I get these chemicals that I have to filter out of the blood. I quit. This guy's too dumb for me to work with. So the liver quits because, why should I bother? Nobody else is bothering, right? Well, you see how that doesn't work well? It just doesn't work. We're all part of this larger consciousness system. It just doesn't work well. So
I think you illustrated that point really, really well.
Did we get that? Did we drive that one home?
I think so.
Yeah, probably beating a dead horse, right? But
one of our mutual dear friends, Marla Fries, was with us in the Costa Mesa workshop. She often reports and does radio broadcasts for Whitney Strieber's Dreamland, and they speak and investigate on aliens. If it is understood that this is a virtual reality, wouldn't it be easier to understand and accept that there are many other virtual realities, and those virtual realities are what we would call alien realities or other worlds? Your big toe concentrates, mainly that this is a virtual reality. So, with the understanding of that concept, make it easier to understand that there are many other reality frames, and these being alien.
Yeah, well, this word alien is kind of a funny word. It means not from here.
Yes.
Right? That's what alien means, not from here. So anything that's not from here is an alien. Well, in our culture, because we have this belief in an objective reality, if it's not from here, then it must be from some other place in the universe. Because after all, the universe is all there is. You see, the universe is all the reality there is because our universe is the only thing that is objective. Anything beyond our universe is, well, not objective. It's not in the universe. So if the universe is all the reality there is, and there's something that's not from here, then it's from some other place in the universe. That means it must be an alien from some other planet, some other sun, some other place in our universe. So we come to that conclusion. Anything that we run into that's unexplainable, obviously something did this, but it wasn't us. Well, the only logical choice, it would seem, if you were a believer in objective reality, is it must be aliens. You see, so you see crop circles. And we have crop circles. We have lots of people investigate crop circles. It's not like the scientific community yawned and looked the other way. There are dozens of scientists, a whole group of scientists, and they come from all over the world. They're from the US, they're from the UK, they're from all over, from Australia, they're from other countries, Germany. The scientists go there because they've heard about these crop circles, and the only way to understand it is to go there and see it yourself. So there's been lots of scientists go to England, mostly. Crop circles show up other places, but they mostly show up there in the UK, and study these crop circles. And pretty much unanimously they come to the conclusion that something really strange is going on here. Something we can't explain. There's obviously these big things, but this idea that a bunch of farmers run out at night, and bend the crops over is not a good explanation. You see, it doesn't work because there will be people perched on the hilltops all around with cameras running and microphones, and nobody hears a thing. It's perfectly quiet. And the cameras, all they saw were little lights moving around. And overnight, of course, in one night, they find some, 15-acre crop circle with a very intricate design that was done in 4 hours, say. 4 or 5 hours, they've been able to limit it to like that span of time with no sound. Well, scientists think about that a while and they say, we didn't do that, we humans, right? It wasn't just some farmers having a laugh on the dummies out in the rest of the world about crop circles. And they have little characteristics, the way the crop is bent, and there's these little black things that look like heat was applied, and there's other things that they've studied. They studied the chemicals, the residues, and all sorts of details about it, and they all add up to a process that is not from here. It wasn't human made. Well, if you believe in an objective reality and it's not human made, what did it? Aliens, of course, from some other planet, some other sun. There's no other explanation. Well, that's because your belief in an objective reality has limited your choices to one. See, again, there are these beliefs. The beliefs are limitations. Because of that belief, you're stuck with aliens. The only thing a rational mind can come to, right, is aliens. Well, this is not an objective reality. This is a statistical reality. It's a virtual statistical reality. And the larger consciousness system is always doing things to get attention. It's always doing things to help people transcend the limiting belief of this is all there is, this universe. There isn't anything more. There isn't anything greater than this physical universe. It's all just this deterministic clock ticking away, you see. And because that's such a limiting belief, it keeps people from seeing bigger pictures, which keeps them from evolving as much as they could evolve if they could just pry open their mind a little wider. So that kind of a attitude is a big inhibitor to the evolution of consciousness. So the larger consciousness system does things regularly to individuals and to groups of people to say, wake up, look, there's something going on here that isn't just physical. Okay? So we get crop circles, we get individual experiences where somebody has a paranormal experience of some sort. We get mediums that can contact Uncle Fred and tell somebody things that only Uncle Fred knew, and things like this. We have all this stuff going on that's out in the woo-woo land of metaphysics and mysticism. But it happens. If it happened to 2 or 3 people, nobody paying any attention. But it happens to lots of people. A survey will tell you that 60% of the population has had paranormal experiences, or maybe it's higher, 70%, a large number of people. So it's not that this just happened to 2 or 3 people who were kind of loose in the mind and, were on the verge of mental illness, having hallucinations and so on. It's common. Well, this is the larger consciousness system's way of giving us a little cold water in the face, a little slap, a little shove, and a little nudge in the ribs, saying, wake up, wake up. Reality is bigger than you think. Look for a bigger picture. Because in this bigger picture, realizing that our point is to grow up, to make good choices, to become love. You don't get to that if you think, it's all just physical reality, that's all it is. You see, then you lose that picture. So that's going on. And the larger consciousness system is playing all the ends of this game. The larger consciousness system is the creator and programmer, if you will, of the virtual reality. You see? Now, the virtual reality wasn't programmed like we program Sims. The virtual reality just evolved. It started from a few initial conditions, the rule set, and it evolved. Okay, but anyway, it's the larger conscious system was what started that rule set, created the rule set, started that evolution going. It's in control of the game. So now let's go back to the Sims. How hard would it be for the people who produced the Sims to create aliens? Could a little green man in a spaceship come down and land on a street corner in the Sims? And how hard would that be? I remember my son playing Civilization years back, and there was a cheat where if you did a certain thing on a keyboard, you got a Mercedes-Benz with a nuclear weapons launcher in it. You automatically beat all the rest of the cavemen, without much trouble that way. But it was a cheat. Well, obviously you can do little green men spaceships if you want. You see, so the larger consciousness system can do whatever it wants. It's reality game. It's in charge. So almost anything is possible, but not almost anything is likely. What's likely are those things that will contribute to the evolution of consciousness in this virtual reality. Well, things like crop circles wake a lot of people up. There's literally hundreds of thousands of people who have been there, seen and felt the reality of it, looked at the science and came to the conclusion that it's not us, something bigger than us, it expanded their mind. Unfortunately, sometimes it only expanded it to aliens rather than to, something larger than physical. Well, at least that's a step in the right direction. A small step, but a step in the right direction. So that's one thing. Another thing is, just because this virtual reality, this virtual reality is huge. It's our whole universe. Billions, trillions of suns. Probably billions of planets. Probably, when I say probably, I mean likely, statistically likely, other civilizations. Aliens, right? Not from here. Okay, so that's likely just because of the massive size of it. And all of this, that we happen to be the only sun with the only planet that just happened to get the right amino acids put together and pop out a living cell that could evolve, is unlikely. What's so special about us? We seem to be just like everything else in the universe, right? We're one of billions of potential places like this. So it would seem reasonable that there are aliens. In other words, other people living in this physical reality, the same virtual physical reality, may have any number of learning labs where people are experiencing things and learning to grow up. They'd be doing the same thing we're doing. See? So that's not that hard to imagine. But because of the constraints, mostly of relativity, it's not likely that these other physical beings, physical in quotes, these other virtual reality individuals are flying in their little ships over here so that they can mash crops on the ground to entertain us. You see, that this doesn't ring real true. There's probabilities with travel, light speed being a speed limit and things like that. Yes, I know Star Wars could go warp speed faster than light, but that was a creation of imagination, not a reality. Yes, aliens could be some other beings in this physical universe, our alien experiences. But it's not because they get in their little spaceships and fly here, physical spaceship and a physical being. It's because it's easy to travel to these other places, other worlds in this universe and other universes. I call other universes would be other reality frames. It's not that hard to travel around within this universe or outside of this universe. It's done with the mind because we're just consciousness. This is just a virtual reality. Big virtual reality was just a virtual reality. You can get around because you are consciousness, you see. Now, you're not going to fly your body around. That violates some laws of physics. But your mind, now, when your mind is there, this virtual reality, let's say here on our planet, in this little virtual reality that we have, what are our bodies? It's information, it's data, it's a virtual reality. So if you want to insinuate yourself into this reality frame as a body, how do you do that? It's just data. Just start to insert your data in the data stream. And if your data is in the data stream that's feeding in this reality frame, then, geez, you got a physical body, you look real, you got little green pointy ears, shiny little spaceship, you see. But that doesn't mean that you flew here from another planet with a physical spaceship. It just means that you can enter that data into this data stream and it will appear in this multiplayer game as people's consciousness. That's how the Sims would get, that's how the Sims would do it, right? Suddenly, the computer would start sending data out to all the users out there with their computers turned on and linked to Sims, and they'd be getting data of little green men with pointy ears and spaceships. Well, hey, there's your aliens. They just have to be inserted in the data stream. That's all. Well, your consciousness. You live in the data stream. You are data. You see? So we can travel around to these places. We can go there. They can come here. But it's not physical like we imagine. And because we can't imagine anything that isn't physical, well, it must be physical. There must be some physical beings and physical spaceships, and they fly here. They must be going warp speeds. Warp being the Star Trek term for faster than light speed. They must be doing all of that, and they sneak in with their spaceship and smush crops, and then run off again and giggle. Why exactly these advanced beings would want to smush our crops and giggle, nobody knows, you see. But the idea that consciousness can do that, the idea that there are ways that beings can travel here and take on bodies by insinuating themselves in a data stream. So you see, it's a different kind of thing. But because we have this belief in an objective physical reality, all we can think of is, green men in spaceships. They're aliens. They live on another planet and they fly here at warp speed. That's because that's all we can think of. So that becomes our metaphor for all of our data. Right? When we're in the as consciousness, we're traveling as consciousness, and we see a being, and we interact with that being, and they say, oh yeah, they're from some other star space, or this or that, and they're here, then we believe that that must be a physical being in a physical ship, because that's the only thing we can imagine, because our beliefs limit us from imagining anything else. The fact that now you're in exploring consciousness space with your mind, you still feel obligated to turn it into something physical, you see. It's just data. Just like it would be in a Sims. It's just data that you're getting now. It's in your data stream. And your data in their data stream. And you're exchanging information. So that's what's going on. So a lot of what we see and hear and smell and taste that are alien, quote unquote, it's not that it's not real. It's not that people are just making it up and it's a figment of their imagination. It's not that they're neurotic or psychotic or having, mental breakdowns or stupid or trying to trick everybody. It's real. But that doesn't make it aliens flying, physical aliens and physical ships flying around in our atmosphere. That's not a reasonable conclusion. That they're real, yeah, probably real experiences. But when you get data, what do? You create a metaphor for it. You interpret it. You have to interpret the data. When you get data, you interpret it. And what do we interpret things like that as? Well, we interpret it as little green men with pointy ears, or lizard faces, or the grays, the reptilians, the this, the that. So we interpret it. Those are things that, and it gets spread around, so we all see the same sort of things because they become archetypes, like Jungian, archetypes. So we all tend to see the same lizard guys and the same, grays and the same big eyes and sad faces and the rest of it, because that's part of our culture now. To interpret things, to use that as the metaphor. So I would say that yes, some of the alien experiences are misinformed, swamp gas and all the rest, too much rich food, too much alcohol. Some of them are like that. Some of them, a lot of them, I believe, are real experiences. They did see something, and it did look something like they described. That was their best metaphor they could come up with. It was a light and it zinged through the sky. Well, what's the difference between a light zinging through the sky, hovering for a while, then quickly moving off and doing things that planes can't do, and a crop circle? Nothing. You see, it's the same thing. Larger consciousness system, waving a little flag. Hey, reality's bigger than you think. Wake up. You see? So lights in the sky, that's not a big deal. Larger conscious system can make lights in the sky. They can even make a little green man with pointy ears, and they can put one standing at your, end of your bed, at night. It's not that big a deal. It's just data in the data stream. That's what our reality is. It's information. So the alien thing is, we tend to make our metaphors all physical because that's all we know and that's what we believe in. That doesn't mean that they are. Sometimes it's just a larger consciousness system giving us wake-up calls. Sometimes it's an interaction happening in consciousness space, not necessarily physical space. But we can't tell the difference because to us, data is data. And if you are in consciousness space and physical space, you can be in two spaces at the same time. So you can be standing out on your back porch with your hand on the rail, with your child hanging onto your leg, and see the spaceship land in your yard, you see. But that doesn't mean that the spaceship's really landing in your physical yard. It just looks that way. That's the way it looks to you because that's the data you're getting. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true. That's why there's usually not 300 people there with movie cameras that see all the same thing. There's 3 or 4 people maybe, or 5 or 10, or just one, you see. When 60 Minutes shows up, all the spaceships go away. We can say it's a game that the larger consciousness is playing to help us see the bigger picture. It's also mind, mental, consciousness traveling. Consciousness is the fundamental reality. This is just a virtual reality with data. So consciousness can interact and do all these things, and when we get data, we interpret it as physical. Oh no, it wasn't consciousness. I was awake. I was right there. I had my hand on the shotgun. We were there, and the thing landed in the yard and did all this stuff. That's because that's the way it looks. That's the data they're getting. And they'll swear that it was physical, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was physical. And they took me up and did operations and, probed my gizzard and did all this other stuff. Well, that's all happening in consciousness space. Let me say, it's most likely happening in consciousness space. This is statistical reality. So to say all never, is not good. It's basically, it's most likely happening in consciousness space for the most part, no matter how physical it feels and looks and touches. All of that's just data. The touch, the feel, the redness on the skin, the burn, on your forehead, whatever the physical things. You say, well, that's physical. Look, it's right there. Well, that's just data. It's not that hard to produce or change. No harder than it is for for one of the programmers in Sims to give somebody a red spot on their arm. Not that hard at all. Color these pixels red. Make the pixels travel around on, with that person's arm. Attach them to that arm. It's not hard. Once you realize we're in a virtual reality, that the fundamental thing here is data, then a lot of these miraculous things aren't really so miraculous. Digital simulations can do miraculous stuff. Things can appear and disappear, all sorts of things can happen. But generally they won't happen unless it really helps forward the evolution here. Whether it's individuals out traveling, forwarding their own personal evolution, interacting with others, or whether it's the system trying to help us see a bigger picture, doesn't really matter. So, we get down to basics. It doesn't matter where these things come from. It's like, so what? All right, they're physical beings and physical ships that have come to play crop circles with us for their own purposes, which we cannot fathom. It doesn't matter. You see, that's not really important that you see it in the same model that I've just presented. I've just presented an alternative model that I think is more logical, that has more of a fundamental basis for why it might be that way. Okay, but it's just a model. I'm not saying I'm right, you're wrong. I'm saying this is a different model. You can look at it this way, and it seems all rational, and it answers questions like, why would they want to come fiddle with our crops? What's that all about? Well, it kind of tells you an explanation for that. The point is that stuff happens, and you get to deal with it. You see, that's the key thing. All right, they're crop circles. All right, scientists have come out and validated them that it's not here, doesn't look like it. All right, that's information. What are you going to do about it? What choices are you going to make? Well, you could ignore it. You could say, oh, that's a bunch of bunk. I don't believe any of that. It's a bunch of drunk farmers running around with pitchforks, going out bending straw. You can make up something to put it out of mind. You can brush it off. Or you can go there, look at the research, make it a part of your own experience. Then it's not believing it because somebody told you that it was, scientists have found that it was real. It's because you're there and you've looked at the data, you've talked to the scientists, you've seen the research, and then it becomes real for you. And when that happens, the question is, now what choices are you going to make? You're going to blow it off, or you're going to start thinking, this place has got dimensions about it I didn't know about. There's something bigger than what I thought going on here, and that will help open your mind. So again, don't believe it because I say things like that. You got to go there. You got to walk around. You got to experience it.
Tom, would you think that at any time in the future there might be some additional information that comes from outside of this reality, some actual more significant information from so-called alien?
Well, we get, entities. Again, if alien is not here, anything but here, then the larger consciousness system becomes alien. So if we let alien be a general concept and not just physical little men that live on other planets and other solar systems, let it be anything that's not here. Information comes that's alien all the time. The larger consciousness system is always, I mean, that's what it does. It trades information, and it wants to help us evolve, but it can't evolve for us. You see, we still have to do it. But many of the inspirations that people get, much of the intuition that people have, is information coming from the larger consciousness system. It's, how do you know things that you shouldn't know? How does that mother know her child is hurt? Well, that's mother's intuition, right? Well, that's information coming out of the larger consciousness system. How do people get these paranormal experiences? Well, it's this information. I had a friend that saw a plane crash and saw everybody on it. And he saw that one little girl was in color and the rest were in black and white. 2 days later, a plane crashes, everybody dies but one little girl. He could put that together. He said, how did I get that 2 days before the plane crashed? How did anybody know that that one girl, would survive, et cetera, et cetera? How did there even be a little girl on that plane? It's before they ever boarded it, days before. How did this happen? So he had real serious problems with free will. It looked like a deterministic reality to him, you see. But it opened his mind, and he started searching, and eventually found answers. So why did that happen to him? It was helpful to him. It helped him grow up. It helped him evolve. And why doesn't it happen to other people? Why have some people never had experiences like that? Because they're not ready for it. It won't help them. They'll deny it. They'll they'll brush it off. They'll doubt their own sanity. Oh, I must have just think that I dreamed that, but I'm not really. They'll make up things, but it won't help them. So there's no point giving people those kinds of experiences if they can't use them, or if it would upset them, or if it would confuse them, or make them fearful. Then you're just pushing them backwards, you see. So if it just knocks the foundation out from somebody, and it just kind of leaves them a wreck, there's no value in that. So you get these kinds of things as you're ready for it, as it can become useful for you. So you want to have these kinds of experiences, you want to be able to do out of body, well then put yourself on a path where that is useful for your growth, as opposed to useful for your entertainment. If you just think it would be cool to go out and fly around, it's not going to happen very easily for you. But if you put it on your path as something that's important to your evolution of your consciousness, then it'll happen. And it'll happen easily. So then we're back to that again. How do you start? Get rid of the beliefs, get rid of the fear, get rid of the ego. Then these things become on your path for your growth, rather than you going out and trying to force these experiences into your own being. It doesn't work so well. So that, I think did we cover that pretty good?
We did. I know there's specific other realities that have their own sets of rules, their own characteristics. And I know in the sense you're saying it's a trade of information, but within these specific other realities, would information ever be traded within our reality? Does it go back and forth? Is information traded back and forth between these specific types of other realities?
That can happen, yes. There can be connections. The connection is mental. It's in consciousness. If you go out with your mind, if you just first learn to meditate. Okay, step one, learn to meditate. Calm all the noise, because otherwise what's in your mind is just garbage. It's stuff flying around. So you have to be able to get rid of all the noise to where you have a perfectly still mind, where you are a point of consciousness in the void. Once you get to that point, then reach out with your mind and make contact. And it's very likely you will. You will find other entities, lots of them, that will make contact with you, that will carry on, that will trade information with you. So information can be passed back and forth among all sorts of reality frames. Some of them are physical like ours, and some of them are like the dream reality. But it's easy to exchange information with other beings. Okay, now the value of that information is something else again. If it's valuable and you learn from it, then it'll probably grow and you'll continue it. You'll maybe make a friend for life, right? But if it's not, if you're just having fun and it's a gee whiz, oh wow, look what I did, then it'll probably never amount to much. It probably will be kind of fun and you'll talk about it, and a year or two later, it'll just be an old experience and it'll go away. So it depends on whether it's significant to your learning. If it is, it will flourish. If it isn't, it'll disappear. But those kind of connections are easy to make. So communication does flow back and forth between various reality frames. Now, it's not like that for everybody. When I say it does happen in the margins. There's not a large percentage of the people on any given night, go into the state of point consciousness and reach out to make a contact. We're talking about a fairly small minority of people who even can meditate, or do have a noiseless enough mind to get to know they had a communication if it came to them. Mm-hmm. So that's a small minority. So I'm not saying that this happens to everybody all the time, but it can happen. It's available to you. And besides that, there's just plain information like library. There's just all this stored information that you have access to. How do people get these plots for their stories? How do writers get their inspiration? Well, they call it inspiration. But most people who get inspiration, even scientists who suddenly, the solution comes clear, right? They will tell you that that's usually done not in the middle of, watching a football game or, skating around the skating rink. It's done at a quiet time where their mind is relaxed and kind of let go. And they kind of open up. And that's when they get the download. You see, well, that's because they are dealing with these databases. They have a desire, their intent goes out, they get the information. So, there's lots of information. And some of it's mundane, how to build a better wheel, stuff like that. It doesn't have to be great, deep, meaningful things about the nature of life. It can be just how to build a better mousetrap.
Just the contact with the other realities is interesting. It's like, there's something else out there. Mm-hmm. I've dropped into a couple of settings where that was interesting.
Sure.
It's almost like traveling here. You've often said that traveling expands your reality. So, therefore, traveling with your consciousness expands your reality
too. Sure.
Even more. I learn things from traveling to different places, seeing how different cultures live, and I think it's interesting, and it is certainly possible if somebody as ordinary and with my background as myself can tap into these things. I think anyone can.
Yes, that's true. Anyone can. You are consciousness. All of us are consciousness, fundamentally. And that gives us all the things, we can do all the things that consciousness can do because we are consciousness. The system is consciousness. That's why we can travel the system. We are a part of it. So that's true, and it does broaden your reality. That's one of the advantages. If you travel, if you're widely traveled, you have a different perspective of reality than if you've never left home. If you've never been out more than 25 miles from the place you were born, you have a whole different perspective of the world. Even if you've watched television and seen a lot of travel logs and the rest of it, it's not the same as being there. And you just get a broader perspective on things. And if you just travel by flying over it in an airplane and staying at a 5-star hotel and then moving on the next day, you don't get a whole lot of it. It's mainly being there, immersing in the culture, immersing in the people that are there and how they think and how they live and what's going on. Mm-hmm. That's where you learn something, not flying into a hotel, spending the night, going out to dinner and then flying off to the next one. That may give you some broader perspective, but that's not what we're talking about. It's you get a broader perspective, not just as a gawker, but participating in these things. But that's open to all of us. And people ask me, say, well, how do you know you're not making it up? And that's a good question. And you have to ask yourself that question, but don't ask it too soon. The big mistake most people make in making contact with other conscious entities that are not of this reality frame, or that are in this reality frame on some other star and planet, is they'll get this connection, and it's like they're talking to somebody, and it's not them. It seems different, and they're immediately saying, "Am I making that up? Am I talking to myself?" And they question it immediately because they want to prove that it's real. This is subjective. There is no proof. There can be no proof that it's real. What you have to do is don't question it immediately. Continue to interact with it. See what value it has. If it doesn't have any value, it doesn't matter where it's from or how real it is. It's of no value. You can waste your time talking to somebody from another reality frame as well as you can talking to one from this one. If it has value to you and you learn and you grow from it, then it doesn't matter where it is. You see, so in the end, it really doesn't matter. It's all about you growing up. So don't get wound about is this real? Now, eventually, you will come to some sort of knowing about how real it is. But it won't be until after you've logged in hours and hours that you've met and you've talked and you've discussed and you've interacted with this person, a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen times. And that may be over 6 months or 6 years. You'll get a sense of the reality of it, because you'll get information that's just, is not in you. It's just nothing that's in your experience. And you'll say, "That's not me. I'd never say that. I'd never come up with that. This isn't my metaphor." And you will get a sense of value to yourself, what you're learning from it, what you get out of it in the exchange, because it's not just you getting something, you get to give something too. It's an interaction. And if the interaction becomes valuable, you'll have a sense of that and of its differentness from you. And sometimes you'll get a sense of, "That's probably just me. That sounds like me. That's the kind of things I would say." And you might figure that you're talking to your own self. You see, but trying to make that determination on day 1 or even day 20 is too early. Just experiment. So you can't be judgmental. Scientists don't jump to a conclusion first time they see something. That's not good science. Good science is to continue, experiment, collect the data, collect the data, collect the data. Eventually you look at all the data and say, well, what is this? How valuable is it? Is this something outside of me or not? And after you've collected enough data, it's not a hard question to answer. Mm-hmm. Before you've collected enough data, it's impossible to answer. So trying to jump to that answer immediately, this is what almost everybody does, is futile. It just makes it impossible. So then you won't be able to say. You'll say, well, I don't know. It could be me, or it might not be me. And then you say, well, what's the point? If I can't tell whether it's me or not, I'll go do something else. This is not profitable. But that's because you're too impatient. Ego wants to know. Yeah. Ego can't stand in uncertainty. Ego needs an answer. I need an answer. I don't like uncertainty. Live with uncertainty, with grace. And then eventually it'll become clear. Whether that eventually takes 6 months or 6 years is hard to tell. And some of them may never become clear. And if they do, well, then let them go. If they're not valuable. So it's that sort of thing. We don't have to know right away. That's we're our worst enemy that way on all this. People do the same thing with out of body. Was that really an out of body, or did I just make that up? And they start analyzing it and judging it, and then it's gone. And then they say, well, I can't do it anymore. Well, of course you can't, because your mind needs to know, is it real? And your mind doesn't have enough information to tell that. So the mind always comes up with, I don't know if it's real or not, because there's no information. You see, so then you give up. That's silly, right? Said, well, I picked up a violin once, and I struck a bow across the strings one time, but I couldn't play music. It's impossible. You can't get music out of a violin. You know, it's that kind of thing. You give up because it just doesn't seem to work for you.
Yeah,
So-
eventually you do know without a doubt that it's real.
Right. And it's better if you start with things that are evidential. If you start with things that are that do have evidence, you know, your remote viewing, your healing, your things that you can go check on. And if you do enough of those, you'll get a good feel for how it works. The evidence checks out. And sometimes it doesn't. And you get a feel for that too. And you can say, yeah, well, actually, I was kind of distracted then. And it was hard getting rid of thoughts. And my mind kept coming and going, you know, and you'll start to see the differences between when it works and when it doesn't. And you'll get better and better at it. So you do this for a few years, and now it's clear when you're doing it right and when it works, because it feels right. And you don't have that question of, well, I wonder if I did any good, or I wonder if that worked, or whatever, because you know the difference between when it does and when it doesn't. And it's the same. You talk with an entity, you know when it's real or not, because you've done these evidential things for years. You know what it feels like when it's right and when it's working, and when it feels that way, you have confidence that this is the real thing. So that then eventually you don't have to, you know, you can very quickly come to a conclusion whether this is a real thing or an imaginary thing. But you can't do that on the first 24 times you try. See, and that's the big mistake. You don't want to judge it too early. You will eventually get to the point that you can judge it accurately and rather quickly. And it is subjective. You know, don't look for objective proof of things that are subjective.
It's your evidence.
It doesn't exist. It's for you. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try to convince anybody else. It's just yours. You know, you don't have to have anybody else agree with you. Take your own experience and take what's valuable and use it. And valuable, I mean, it's not whether you get good stock market advice, but valuable in the sense that it helps you grow up.
Thank you very much, Tom.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
The interview has been out of this world.
It's been a lot of fun, though.
Thank you.